This is BBC News, the headlines. The embattled Governor of New York State, Andrew Cuomo, has announced his resignation in the face of a sexual harassment scandal. He will quit office in 2 weeks' time. The US Senate has passed a $1 trillion infrastructure plan after months of political wrangling. Unusually, the measure had bipartisan support. Nearly 20 Republicans joined Democrats in voting for the bill. It now goes to the House. In the UK, record numbers of top grades for A-level students in England, Wales and Northern Ireland after exams were cancelled for a second year in a row because of the pandemic. Lionel Messi, the world's best-paid footballer, is moving to Paris Saint-Germain, subject to medical tests. The Argentinian has played for Barcelona for more than 20 years, but he had to leave the club for financial reasons. You're watching BBC News. Hello and welcome to BBC Papers. Joining us tonight to look at the front pages are broadcaster David Davis and political writer and academic Maya Goodfellow. Thank you both for being with us. So the front pages then. After results day today, the Telegraph claims traditional A-level grades face being scrapped under government plans amid fears that record numbers of top marks are making them meaningless. A gradual tightening of grades over several years is being planned to prevent employers losing confidence in the exams, according to the Eye. As well as leading on calls for change, the Times reports that Gavin Williamson is said to be in danger of being replaced as Education Secretary after a series of missteps. The FT says that the record-setting results have put pressure on universities to find places for an excess of top-rated students. The Guardian reports on the gap between private and state school A-level grades, which is now at its widest in the modern era. State school pupils are falling behind, writes the Daily Mail. 70% of private school results were top grades, compared to 39% at comprehensives. The Mail also covers the lawsuit that's been filed against Prince Andrew on its front page, as does the Metro. The woman who's filed the lawsuit has accused Prince Andrew of sexually abusing her when she was 17. Allegations that he has previously denied. And Messi makes his move. The Independent shows the footballer waving to fans as he arrived in the French capital after agreeing a 2-year deal with Paris Saint-Germain. So we must start, of course, with A-levels, and so many people waiting with bated breath to find out what they got today. Lots of happy faces on the front pages, David, but the Times saying call for urgent A-levels overhaul as grades soar. Maybe too many happy faces on the front pages for some, it would appear. But we don't know. It's all very speculative at the moment. It's all a bit fresh and a bit raw.
Well, Maya and I talked about the impact of the inequalities within today's results. About an hour ago, we talked about regional variations. We talked about the differences and the widening gap between, on the one hand, private and the top state schools, and on the other hand, most state schools. We perhaps didn't talk about the difference between girls and boys. Girls have done rather better, again, than the boys in these results as a whole. And that's before you get to certain other differences as well. In this Times story, there's an influential contribution, as usual, from Robert Halfon, who's the chairman of the Education Select Committee, he's supporting the scrapping of A-levels altogether and the going over to the International Baccalaureate, which is now, I didn't realise this, is now being covered by 150 countries worldwide. And then, of course, there's potentially another not very happy story for poor old Gavin Williamson, who's told he's about to be replaced by Kemi Badenoch, who's referred to as a rising star of the Tory party. Not always a helpful tag in days gone by, I have to say. But the big question is, where is education policy heading now? And that remains to be seen.
Because, of course, Maya, all of this is set against a backdrop of 2 academic years that have been immensely disrupted. Pupils have had to cope with that disruption. Teachers have had to sort of make it up as they've gone along as different rules have changed. It's been very, very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And all those young people out there last year and this year who've got these grades, they've just worked incredibly hard regardless of the outcome. And they've really been through it. I really, really feel for them. It's been an incredibly disruptive year, and I imagine incredibly difficult for a lot of young people, in particular those who haven't necessarily had access to the online learning, if they maybe don't have internet connectivity or they don't have access to their own devices. So yeah, incredibly difficult. And there's now a lot of speculation, as you've said, as the Times is saying and the Telegraph is saying, around the changes that might happen to the A-level system because of this increased proportion of A and A stars over the past few years. And we have these, if you set aside COVID and the pandemic, you do have these sort of slight moral panics whipped up, I think, sometimes around this so-called grade inflation. And I think we don't want to ignore how hard students work. But I would also say that any sort of change that the government do pursue needs to be really measured and think about the problems of the traditional examination system, looking at actually a system
platforms.
Of exams.
That's it from us on Wales at 6. Thanks for watching. Charlene White's next with your
pupils, I think, is something really worth considering. But it seems at the moment you have people like Robert Halfon, who's chair of the Education Select Committee and a Conservative MP, saying, as David said, for the scrapping of A-levels and the introduction of the international baccalaureate. But you also have these sort of rumours around whether the government are considering shifting away from the way that the A-levels are graded in a style akin to what they did with GCSEs. I would really be worried about more and more focus on examinations, which is something that the government has been doing for the past few years, looking at how that impacts different students. I don't think it's a particularly positive move, and really a consideration about what our education system is for and how to make sure that all students are getting the best out of the education system, and not only focusing on these sort of important moments like A-levels, but maybe the amount of emphasis we put on that isn't always so helpful.
And something else for them to address, David, on The Guardian, the gap that's widened between private and state schools, the widest it's been in the modern era. This obviously is exercising quite a lot of people who are in education.
Yes, this doesn't sit very well, does it, with Boris Johnson's levelling up campaign and efforts in that direction. And, education is one of those subjects, along with health, of course, that governments feel very vulnerable about when they've been in power for several years. And even though it would have been very, very difficult for any government over the past 2 years, there's no doubt about that. You do wonder how their U-turns, let's put it like that, their U-turns in this area have seemed rather even more damaging than their U-turns elsewhere.
Let's look at the Yorkshire Post, Maya. Herd immunity, hope, now a mythical dream after variant. And this is Professor Sir Andrew Pollard, director of the Oxford Vaccine Group, saying that, yes, carry on getting vaccinated, but it's not going to mean the end of coronavirus.
Yeah, he was giving evidence to MPs today, and essentially what this is sort of rooted in is you're not going to reach this idea of herd immunity is essentially mythical, I think is the term that he used, because what we know and what in a recent Imperial College London study suggested to us is that people who are fully vaccinated can contract coronavirus. You're less risk of contracting it, and you're less likely to be seriously ill if you do contract it, but it doesn't sort of guarantee that you won't contract it. And so the idea that the virus will be stopped circulating in society purely through vaccination simply isn't a possibility, and there won't be this so-called herd immunity reached. There is a sort of discussion then around what you do next, and one thing that Sajid Javid, who's the health secretary, has been talking about is this idea of booster jabs for people who are vulnerable, people who are older, people who have underlying health conditions. There is some sort of pushback around this from certain scientists, saying that maybe we need to wait and see in relation to people contracting the virus. We do need to be concerned around those vulnerable groups and not just assuming that everyone can sort of magically return to normal, in particular people with underlying health conditions. But as I said earlier, I think one of the really important things here is, especially when you're talking about boosters in a country like the UK where so many people are vaccinated, we really need to be putting at the forefront of the conversation global vaccinations. There are still many people around the world who don't have access to the vaccine because of this vaccine apartheid, where you have richer states like the UK, like Canada, buying up large numbers of the vaccine, and essentially meaning that other countries cannot vaccinate even older people. And so we are not all safe until everyone is vaccinated, but we really need to be thinking about the people who are unsafe because they aren't able to access the vaccination, and really looking at that major inequality globally, I think, is really important.
And even in some of the wealthier countries, people are turning down the vaccine, David, aren't they? I was talking to an emergency doctor in Texas earlier tonight, and he was saying that everyone he's treating, and there's a big surge in numbers, they're all unvaccinated and very poorly, underlining the need to have the jab, because it will hopefully mean your symptoms are not so severe.
Well, two things about that. One, those who spoke out against the AstraZeneca jab in the early days of this and created so many scare stories around it, they have something to answer for. There is no doubt about that, particularly in the countries that Maya has been talking about. And the second point I would make, let's get some good news here somewhere. The opposition to the COVID jab in our own country from younger people seems to be diminishing significantly.
Yep, and 75% of adults are fully vaccinated in this country now. Let's look at the Daily Express, David. Super scans give hope in dementia battle. A very promising piece of research here, particularly when you think that we're an ageing population and the number of people suffering from dementia is likely to rise.
Hey, it's like the good old days in the press preview, when whatever the rest of the press were doing, the Daily Express would their health editor would get a front page splash, and here it is. And you know, it appears, and you yourselves have been running the story during today. The Express talks about a fantastic development, those quotes, in treating dementia, thanks to AI and computer. The fact that one scan at the right time and early on can make a huge difference. And if the story is to be believed, and it is, I think, you know, your own correspondent your own health editor was very about it. It's a terrific story.
Yes, and the fact that it's so quick to diagnose, Maya, and just briefly, we know with dementia, early intervention can make such a difference to patients' life expectancy.
Absolutely, these kinds of sort of moves forward, as you say, with like identifying these changes in the brain, which is what this story is saying, after potentially a single scan, spotting very small changes in the brain that I assume at the moment are very difficult to detect, or not possible to detect, could be incredibly important, as you say, for earlier treatment. And knowing just how horrendous dementia is, it seems to be a positive step in the right direction. So welcoming this kind of advancement with medicine.
A couple of back pages now. First, the sports page of the Mirror. Scum of this earth, Euros, hate tweet, shame of UK. The UK, David, was by far the main origin of abhorrent racist abuse on Twitter after England lost the Euro 2020 final. There were so many people I spoke to who said that when they saw Marcus Rashford, Bukayo Saka and Jadon Sancho miss those penalties, they knew that they were going to be in for an appalling time, and here we have the evidence of it.
Yes, they did. And my question would immediately be, if Twitter are saying this, what are Twitter and what indeed are other social media companies planning to do about it? And my question, not just for them, but also for others, the football authorities, is can they put their hands on their heart tonight, tomorrow, and say they are doing absolutely everything, not later in the year, not next year, not after legislation, now, to significantly prevent this from going on into the new season? Because I believe that there are in existence ways of bringing this ghastly problem, which is an absolute disgrace for our country, to bring it down significantly. And the question is, when is that going to happen?
Well, Twitter say that they removed 1,622 tweets, Maya, in the 24 hours after the game. 99% of the suspended accounts were their owners were identifiable. I think just under 13,000 tweets were removed in total. But is removing tweets sufficient? I mean, you wonder whether there's some kind of algorithm that could stop them being posted in the first place. I don't know enough about how these things work, but like David says, it needs to be more proactive than that, not reactive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really does matter, in particular for, those young football fans who looked up to these wonderful football players as real role models and still do. And them having to experience and see that kind of abuse, I think, is absolutely disgusting. As you said, it was unfortunately when the game went as it did, was unfortunately all too predictable for too many people in the UK. But I think part of what this story is about and the way the sort of reaction that I've seen to it is that there was an instant reaction from some people, certain commentators, that actually these accounts were all outside of the UK and people were whipping this up to try and say that racism was a problem in the UK when it isn't. And although racism in the UK evidently goes beyond these explicit and overt forms of racism, this really is a sign, really does show us how deep racism runs, that it is a problem in the UK and that we really need to get serious about tackling it and addressing it and not have these ridiculous reports suggesting that institutional racism isn't a problem. This really is just the tip of the iceberg, I think. And so, yes, we need action from social media organisations like Twitter, but we also need action throughout society to really address systemic racism in Britain, which is a serious problem.
Quick comment from you, Maya, about the Guardian Sport page. New diamond in Paris. Lionel Messi completes his Paris Saint-Germain move and signs a 2-year deal. He'll be earning about £1 million a week.
Yeah, I mean, this is all over quite a lot of the papers. It's obviously a big sort of historic move given Lionel Messi's career at Barcelona. To me, it's very difficult to get around the huge amounts of money that's involved in this. It's involved in large parts of football. When you also see people who go and watch the matches being priced out the game, there seems to be a major problem there in terms of how these things are structured. And
he had to leave Barcelona because they couldn't afford him anymore, David.
Well, that's true. But I have to tell you, my wife believes that an hour ago I overstated his wages by saying he was going to get £1 million a week or something. Then I read in The Guardian that perhaps she was right, £29.6 million a year. But then I read
that's after tax, I think. That's after tax.
Yeah, but what about bonuses? You see, that's what I've been told about. But anyway, I haven't changed my view, and I don't think I ever will change my view. It is obscene. It is indefensible. It is the world we are living in for these people who I compare to the showbiz stars of Hollywood in the 1930s.
I'm just glad that Mrs. Davis is paying so much attention to what we're doing. I'm grateful. I'm grateful to her.
Thank you.
We'll just give her a quick wave. Where are you? Thank you, Mrs. Davis. Let's finish, shall we, with the Daily Telegraph. Climate czar, I drive a diesel, says Alok Sharma. And so do a lot of people, and they're going to have to stop. David.
Well, was I over harsh to Mr. Sharma an hour ago when I talked about stupid politics? Only his advisers will know if he was warned how likely he was to be asked a question as simple as, well, what do you drive, Secretary of State? But anyway, there we have it. I mean, he's tried to help himself by saying, well, his next car will be electric. Well, of course it will. But we shall see. I agree very much with Maya that this is, the sort of story that runs around. I don't think it changes the world. We were all being encouraged, it's entirely true, a few years ago to buy diesel cars. I think I had one once. I haven't got one at the moment, but, I still am very dubious of we haven't met. Isn't it extraordinary that yesterday's papers were full of this enormous story about the environment and the global warming and all the rest of it. And today we can barely find it on the front page.
No, but I'm sure we will in the run-up to COP26, which, of course, is what Alok Sharma is president of, this all-important climate change conference. I mean, he does say, Maya, just briefly, that he uses public transport a lot, but he's also made a lot of flights, and that was in the papers recently too.
Yeah, great. But what we really need from the government is to make public transport cheaper across the country. I'm from Newcastle originally. It's so much cheaper for me to get a bus in London than it is for me to get a bus in Newcastle. So we can sort of get caught up in these stories about individual politicians and the decisions they make. And yes, it matters to a degree. But I think the bigger issue is really we need more concrete plans from the government about the immediate steps they're going to take to get us to reducing emissions. Because at the moment, the plans they have are really aren't up to scratch, almost non-existent, as they're pursuing other things like airport runways and major road building pushes, which really fly in the face of their pledges on the climate.
All too far in the future for a lot of campaigners' likings. Maya, David, lovely to see you. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, for looking at the front pages of the papers. Do buy a paper in the morning, won't you? Gives us something to talk about every night. Do have a very good night. See you soon.